Addressable market is $26.6 billion in 2021.
At a conservative scenario of 2.5% growth, we'd end up at $30 billion in 2026.
2021 obviously saw a really strong rebound in growth for media localization.
And welcome everyone to SlaterPod 113. Hello, Esther. Hello, Anna.
Hey, Florian. Hey, Anna.
We are firmly in the triple digits, and today we brought on somebody from our very own team. Anna Wyndham, you're joining us today to talk about our 2022 Language Industry Market Report, our flagship annual report that's out now. It's a 100-page beauty, and it's been out now for a few days. So first, congratulations, Anna, on the report.
Thanks. Yep, it's got a lot of very interesting content. And as you said, 100 pages.
100 pages, so one big report there. And then we're going to go through some of the highlights of the report just for people to understand what it's about. We're going to give you some high-level data points of, market size and like which vertical performed how. And then we're going to round off, Esther, you and I, we're going to talk about Lilt and Genie in our abbreviated news segment, because while we're publishing reports, the industry continues to produce pieces of news. So, Anna, first, tell us a bit more about what does the report cover in terms of like industry analysis first.
The report covers industry market size and growth in 2021. It analyzes the language industry through the lens of 10 primary buyer verticals. We list the top growing verticals by percentage and US dollar growth. We have a geographic analysis there that lists market share and percentage growth per region and identifies the fastest growing markets in North America, Europe, and Asia. We also have that buyer intentions framework that we introduced last year. So this identifies 9 primary drivers or reasons that buyers need localization services, so the kind of underlying rationales. And we have an infographic as well that shows the more than 200 core and adjacent services provided by leading language service providers. We look at the competitive landscape, so analysing data from the Slater 2022 Language Service Provider Index, which came out a couple of weeks ago. So it's a segment-by-segment analysis of their growth and market share in 2021. We, of course, look at core translation technologies, machine translation, TMS, analysing the ecosystem there, the key players, and the main business models. And a quick close-up as well on that M&A activity in the TMS space, which was really prominent in 2021. And, of course, we've got a market outlook there, growth for 2022 and projections to 2026.
What happened in 2021? So tell us, what's our headline figure for market size, and what's the growth figure there?
Addressable market is $26.6 billion in 2021, according to our calculations. So it was a full recovery from the slowdown in 2020. Market size increased by 11.75% compared to 2020. So yeah, we see that the market remains very resilient, and we've identified the reasons before: the diversity of buyer sectors, adaptability to remote work, and early adoption of AI in the supply chain is another factor coming into play there.
Yeah. So this figure is very much relied upon by anybody looking to invest in the language industry. So So we tend to be, we've spoken about this many times, Esther, you and I, right? We tend to be on the conservative side here. Now, why are we more on the conservative side compared to, some of our competitors like Nimdzi, like CSA?
I mean, it's difficult for us to say, I think, in terms of what the methodology is used by others, but I think we probably take a slightly narrower view of what constitutes the services and the technologies involved in the core language industry. So, I mean, Anna mentioned earlier just the services map of, services provided as core services, translation, localization, you can rattle off a lot of them. and then adjacent services, which a lot of LSPs do, like technical writing, content authoring. You know, I could rattle off a whole load, but so I think we're probably taking a slightly narrower view of defining the kind of core of the language industry.
Got it. So Anna, let's look at the geographic split here on our headline figure. So we also divided this out for, I think, North America and Europe, for example. Like, what are these two blocks? How much do they generate?
Yeah, I mean, the report has a full segmentation, but for North America, market size is at $10.38 billion US dollars in 2021. And we see this is being driven by their main sectors, technology, healthcare sector is really important there, as well as manufacturing and engineering. And then Europe, market size, 9.6 billion US dollars in 2021. And public sector tends to dominate there as well.
Very good. And Anna, you mentioned earlier just about the sort of vertical split that we make when we're dissecting the industry. Are there any insights that you can share on a vertical basis?
Yeah, some interesting insights. The smallest vertical in those 10 bio verticals is gaming, but this also happened to be the fastest growing in 2021. So it increased by 26% from 2020. And the drivers behind that, widespread adoption of smartphones.
Yeah, keywords probably accounted for a significant portion of that, didn't they? Their localization, I think, grew like 20% in 2021 or so. Big player in the market.
Yep, definitely seeing those double-digit growth figures for those LSPs specialized there. Other key verticals or highlight verticals, manufacturing and engineering was below industry average. It was at 6%, and one of the contributing factors is, of course, the disruptions to supply chains in 2021. And then stronger growing verticals, technology always, but especially life sciences, increasing by 19% from 2020, and media localization, which increased by 18% from 2020.
And that was probably just on media localization. I mean, they had a really rough ride in 2020. So I think, I can't remember the exact stats from 2020, but I think, we've discussed the reasons why media in particular was impacted in 2020 with closures of dubbing studios and things like that. But I think in 2021, obviously saw a really strong rebound in growth for media localization.
Yeah, definitely the case. So they're back to producing new materials, continuing to localize back catalogs. We see those streaming platforms expanding internationally. And this new strategy as well of local for global content. For example, Squid Game is the most talked about, but this is a real strategy that's impacting the industry. So streaming platforms are creating content for local markets, but with a view for global consumption. So it's creating all of this volume demand, but also demand for these new language combinations. And we do a bit of a deep dive in the report into this because it's such an interesting area, and kind of compare the different expansion strategies that these different platforms have taken in terms of where they're expanding to, where they're going next, and how that's impacting on the demand.
Yeah, so I was going to say, I think the report takes an expanded look at media localization, also video localization. Are there other areas that we're pulling out and highlighting in the report?
Yeah, we also do a bit of a deep dive on interpreting services and tech. So we have 11 pages analyzing this subsector. And we look at demand drivers in the US, Europe, and Asia Pacific, especially the rise of telehealth, and we kind of dived into that into the most recent SlaterCon. So some really interesting insights there about how this is changing interpreting. And then we look at how, of course, remote technology is transforming the sector. This is probably one of the biggest changes the sector's ever experienced. So we look at what implications it has for growth, funding, and competition, and how different players in this sector are kind of positioning themselves, what they're prioritizing in terms of developing their product.
Then we also look at frontier tech, or at least what we call frontier tech, for lack of a better word, frontier language tech. So what are the two most interesting quote unquote language frontier tech areas? Give us the highlights.
So frontier tech is a super interesting area. In the report, we look at speech synthesis and speech-to-speech translation.
My favorite.
And the other are these large language models and their potential to impact on text generation. And what we try and do in the report is to understand how these frontier technologies are being productized at the moment, who the early movers are in these areas, and what type of language services and products they're offering, and how that can impact on the language industry at the moment. So, for example, we see synthetically dubbed media. It's a new means of accessing new markets for media localizers, for media production companies. We have companies like Papercup and DeepDub. So they're using this speech synthesis and speech-to-speech translation technology to offer synthetic dubbing of video content. And we can see it mainly used for content like news, documentaries, user-generated content, not so much the high-end Hollywood stuff yet. But we do see that it's kind of expanding the market because it's making it so much more accessible to dub this type of content. And I think last week or the week before, you covered Google's move into this area as well.
Yeah, the Aloud project, right? Google Aloud, where it's basically building. I think it's an internal Google project. So
for YouTube.
For YouTube, okay. And then, yeah, you said the other one was like these language models that people are building on top of these GPT-3s and what have you. I mean, now I read that there's GPT-Y and there's this big Google thing that we're trying to parse for our readers and we're not done yet. I think it's still like in our pipeline to cover this. What was it called? I forgot. I tried to unpack it last week. Anyway, so these big language models that people are building on top of. And I think we call it like synthetically generated content marketing, right? And so you can work with those. Just tell us just the top 2 highlights there, top 2, 3 highlights, what we're seeing, what kind of players are in that space.
Yeah, so, I mean, as you mentioned, all of these large language models are being released. We saw Google releasing a model with 1.3 trillion parameters in December 2021, very recent. So that's the largest at the moment. But Microsoft also released one in October 2021 and GPT-3 earlier in the year. And I mean, the key point is that they have language capabilities. They can comprehend and produce language. They can analyze sentiment. They can answer questions and so on. So they have really a huge number of potential applications. One potential application that we see is taking off already is generating content marketing, as you said. So content marketing is quite well suited to this technology because it's needed in large volumes. It has a short shelf life. It doesn't need to be as polished as, say, high-end advertising copy. So we see startups such as Copy AI or otherwise AI creating these products that allow you to automatically generate emails, blogs, e-commerce copy, all different types of texts just by inputting a small amount of data, for example, a summary or a couple of keywords. And these, of course, are available in multiple languages. So at the moment, content marketing is either produced in the original language and localized, or it's produced in a multilingual content origination workflow based on a brief. But we can see that this synthetic content marketing is kind of moving into that space, maybe not necessarily disrupting it or taking away from that market, maybe expanding it. But definitely it's in the same space. They're providing the same service.
So Google will have to figure out eventually, if everybody's using these models to produce original content marketing, Google probably has to then figure out and prioritize content that was written by a human and that where there's some effort that went into it for SEO. Okay, now we're getting really like into the weeds of it, but if everybody at the click of a button can generate, thousands and thousands of words of like original content, then at some point, like it's just another SEO game. All right, so we're fascinated by that, and I also tend to fall down that rabbit hole. And I'm glad I recently read a really interesting post by a founder. I forgot the company name. It was on like Andreessen Horowitz's Future Sites. It's like it's kind of a, well, for lack of a better word, a content blog platform by the venture capital firm Andreessen Horowitz. And anyway, so that founder also kind of laid out the history of all these large language models and did say, basically concluded that a lot of stuff is happening super fast. And that guy basically founded his company based on this, on these technologies, right? So it's not like just us struggling to comprehend the speed of it all, but it's like even founders in that space are struggling to understand the progress. So I think we also had on our list here that we wanted to talk about Meta's roadmap for speech-to-speech translation, but I think people can just read up on it. I think it's, I think if we keep talking about it, then people are like, hey, you guys wanted to talk about your language industry market report, and here you are falling into these kind of AI rabbit holes again. So let's talk about the outlook. So we were at $26 billion in $26.6 billion in total market size. And for the outlook, we had a couple of different scenarios here. So tell us what are the figures here? What are the conservative and the optimistic in our base case?
Yeah. So the reason we have these different scenarios is that there are a number of different macro factors that are creating a lot of uncertainty: inflation, supply chain disruptions, the war in Ukraine, and so on. So conservative scenario growth of 2.5% year on year, to the most optimistic scenario, which is 7.5% growth.
So if we're looking at it's interesting how different the outcome would be, right? So at a conservative scenario of 2.5% growth, which is, quite conservative, we'd end up at $30 billion in 2026. If you take the 7.5% year-on-year scenario, we'd end up at $38 billion in 2026. So you see the magic of compound, compound interest at work here. No, it's true, right? And so our base case takes us to just below $36 billion. So right now we're at 2026. So there's like, and even our base case means that in the next few years, there's like another $10 billion up for grabs, right? And so that is a very, very attractive scenario here that we're looking forward to capturing that. Maybe we should start an LSP.
Let's do it. With the language models.
Yeah, with the language, exactly, with the language models. So now let's talk about the macro. I made a few notes. I mean, it's just, we're at an extremely uncertain point right now because we had this somewhat unexpected kind of bumper year last year, despite all the kind of restrictions because of COVID, there was just so much money flooding the market and inflation really hadn't taken hold yet. So everybody provided funding and etc. And generally businesses rebounded from COVID. But now this kind of inflation that people, said it was some government said it was going to be transitory. Now it's not, and all that money printing means it's not really transitory. So you're seeing interest rates rising sharply, some of the benchmark, like the 10-year Treasury note that the U.S. Treasuries are going up quite strongly. Now, this is actually relevant to the language industries because as these kind of benchmarks go up, stocks tend to get hit quite hard because of some, let's not get into the details there. I'm not the right person to explain that. But basically, eventually what it's going to do, it's going to filter into the funding environment. So you'll see probably somewhat more conservative funding environment for language industry startups as well. Not that those are first in line to get hit by a slowdown. And then also there is the M&A side's probably going to slow down a little bit as opposed to 2021. And then generally, of course, as the entire economy slows down, of course, you see probably some of the just outright demand for language services going to slow down a little bit. I'm not expecting, again, our base case is for 2.5% growth. Our conservative case is for 2.5% growth. So we're still expecting growth, but it's probably, I expect it a bit more towards the conservative side this year, given what's happened over the past 4 to 6 weeks, just generally globally. So yeah, but again, to end on a more positive note, I mean, typically the language industry is very resilient and tends to ride out these cycles quite well. I mean, it's correlated with the broader economy, but it's not overly correlated, so it wouldn't go down more than the broader economy. So, so I just said that we're going to see maybe a bit of a pullback on the funding, but there is... However, well, those deals were probably lined up before, probably towards the end of last year, right? So Esther, tell us more about two fundings that were just announced last week.
Yeah, well, the biggest of the two, Lilt, raised 55 million in their Series C funding. That was announced in early April. That brings the total funds raised by Lilt to $92.5 million US, so considerable amount of money there. And the Series C is roughly 2 years after Lilt raised $25 million in their Series B. This latest round is led by Four Rivers VC. They've got also new investors, Sorensen Capital, Clear Ventures, Wipro Ventures. And the existing investors, including Sequoia, Intel, and Redpoint, which, well, you will remember, Florian, but others might not, that we had Thomas Tungus from Redpoint Ventures back in SlaterCon San Francisco in 2019. So yeah, they also participated in this latest round. The valuation, undisclosed, unsurprisingly, but in terms of, well, one kind of metric.
Tell us why. Why is it undisclosed? Give us the metric. Spence, come on, tell us.
Okay, we can invite him on again. Give him a grilling as to why he doesn't want to disclose.
Need data points.
I mean, it's his prerogative. Let's put it that way. He's not required to disclose. Doesn't want to. So
unless they go IPO. Okay, let me just pause you there for a second. You know what? Did you see what they put on LinkedIn? On LinkedIn, they put a picture.
Yes, the NASDAQ.
The NASDAQ. So NASDAQ, the stock exchange in New York, right, put a giant kind of congratulatory notes on their monster-like screen in, like in New York, outside of the stock exchange. So I tweeted below, like, well, IPO soon? Nobody replied. Only Chris from Sumo liked my tweet, but nobody else replied. So
you should have done it on LinkedIn.
Yeah, right. It was on Twitter. I saw it on Twitter.
Because I saw the same thing. Yeah, I saw the same thing on LinkedIn.
So what's the point here is that, well, now they're not disclosing, but, you know, they're raising, what is it, a Series C now? Well, after Series C, yeah, you can do another Series D, or you go public, right? And NASDAQ, I mean, that's basically kind of lead generation by NASDAQ. So they're congratulating, hoping that they're going to, you know, go public on NASDAQ. And then we know all the details and the financials.
They could do a Series D, a Series E, and then go public.
Yeah, Series E. Now, Series D maybe, but, well...
We did have one. We had, like, wasn't it Verbit or somebody did a Series E? I can't remember. One of the companies that we're tracking did a Series E, but yeah, it seems to be somewhat less typical.
Yeah, at some point you just have to, you know, jump.
So anyway, Lilt, back to Lilt. They have 150 employees. That was one metric that he did, Spence did tell us. And he also said, just talking about growth in the company, they're seeing growth across the board, across multiple sectors, but they have noticed unique applications in education, crypto, technology, and defense and intelligence, supposedly, for their services. And Spence also spoke to us a little bit about the roadmap, which seemed very much focused on developing MT, developing connectors also. So, for example, Spence said that Lilt's working on significant updates to its MT system to support high volume use cases, and that they've developed more than 100 neural MT models in the past 2 years. So sounds like a lot. They've been busy. And the idea being here to support customers who are looking to transition to fully automatic workflows. So congratulations to Lilt on a large amount of money, and let's see what they do with it.
Fully automatic. So cutting out the expert in the loop here, are we? No, I'm just... Yeah, but I mean, that's what he said. They said fully automatic workflows, meaning it's fully automatic. So steering a little bit more towards the pure tech angle. All right, let's go to Genie. Genie, Jeenie, Genie.
Genie, yeah, so different kind of ball game here in terms of type of company. This is an on-demand healthcare interpreting platform called Genie, which raised $9.3 million US in a Series A, and they did tell us about the valuation.
Hey, thank you.
But the valuation is around $34 million for Genie. And that was the Series A round led by Transformation Capital.
Wait.
it. That is better late than never.
For the listeners, we found like our platform launched a few new features, among them canned cheers and canned clapping and stuff like that.
It'd be great if we could have it on cue rather than sort of 10 seconds after the, the thing that warrants a applause. Yeah, we'll get better. But yeah, just a bit about Genie, because I think maybe they've been flying under the radar for some people in the industry. I mean, they did a seed round back in 2018, so 3-4 years ago now. Launched the product back then. They were actually initially focused on international tourists, so that kind of market in the US.
Yeah, that was tough in 2020.
Well, exactly. So when COVID hit, they pivoted the business to healthcare, which, I mean, fairly smart decision given, what we were saying about healthcare market, healthcare interpreting, etc. So now they have about 90% of their customers within that sector. So healthcare enterprises, doctors' offices, clinics, hospitals, those kind of profile of user. And the monthly recurring revenue, MRR, is currently growing at around 25%. So got some good traction there. In terms of what they're going to do with the funds, they plan to grow the team, and engineers, product experts, hiring people in those areas of specialty, and plans to develop UX, UI for clients and for interpreters that use the platform. They obviously, like I said, currently focused on healthcare. There's potential for expansion into immigration and refugee support, they said, as well as other critical services. But the idea here is to remain focused on interpreting, like pure play interpreting, and not so much kind of branching out into translation to become a full-blown LSP or anything along those lines. But it's a marketplace model at the moment, kind of gig economy marketplace with like specific minimum requirements and qualifications for interpreters. So that is Genie.
That is Genie, ladies and gentlemen.
Genie in a bottle, in a nutshell.
Genie in a phone. And so Genie will also contribute to the $26.62 billion language industry market that grew by 11.75% compared to 2020, as you can read up in our flagship 2022 market report. Congratulations, Anna, for putting this together. And we're very excited to also host a briefing in late April. Go check out I forgot the date, but check out the date for anybody who bought the report or is a Slator Strategy Package subscriber. So looking forward to seeing you there.
See you there.
All right. That's a wrap for today. Thank you very much.